Hello there, friends. Welcome back to Daily Lore with Grandpa Ben. Tonight, we're taking a journey deep beneath the irradiated surface of post-nuclear America to explore one of the most chilling aspects of the Fallout universe, the Vault experiments. These weren't shelters built to save humanity. They were laboratories, prison cells, petri dishes where Vault-Tec Corporation played God with the lives of thousands of unsuspecting Americans who believed they were the lucky ones, the chosen survivors of nuclear holocaust. But the truth is far darker than radiation-scorched wastelands and mutated creatures. The truth is that humanity's greatest threat wasn't the bombs. It was the people who promised to save us from them. So dim the lights, my friends. This is going to be a long night, and the stories we're about to explore will take us to some of the darkest corners of human experimentation. Let's begin. Part 1. The Foundation of Deception. Before we dive into the individual vaults, we need to understand the grand design, the terrible vision that turned shelters into experimental chambers. In the years leading up to the Great War of 2077, the United States government commissioned the Vault-Tec Corporation to construct a network of underground bunkers as part of Project Safehouse. With a population approaching 400 million people, the nation would have needed nearly 400,000 vaults the size of Vault 13 to actually save everyone. Vault-Tec was commissioned to build only 122. That should have been the first clue. These vaults were never meant to save the American population. They were designed as massive social experiments, each vault with its own specific data-gathering purpose. Only a handful, perhaps 17 of the 122 vaults, were designated as control groups, functioning as intended to provide a baseline for comparison. The rest, they were laboratories where human subjects would be pushed to psychological, physical, and ethical breaking points. The data collected from these experiments was intended for the Enclave, a shadow government consisting of high-ranking officials and wealthy elite who had their own survival plans. According to information from the Fallout Bible and statements from the original developers, the Enclave's ultimate goal wasn't to rebuild America on Earth. The Enclave believed that nuclear war would render the planet uninhabitable, so they planned to use the Vault data to construct a multi-generational starship for colonization of another world. They needed to know how humans would respond to isolation, to genetic modification, to psychological stress, to leadership challenges, to every conceivable scenario they might face during centuries of space travel. And so Project Safehouse began, breaking ground in 2054 with the first proof-of-concept vault constructed beneath Los Angeles. Over the following years, vaults were scattered across the United States. By 2063, most construction had concluded, though Vaults 13 and 112 weren't completed until 2074, just 3 years before the bombs fell. When the Great War began on October 23, 2077, those with reserved spots hurried to their assigned vaults. Most believed they were the fortunate ones. They had no idea they were walking into carefully constructed nightmares. The overseer of each experimental vault was typically a planted Vault-Tec operative whose job was to control the experiment from within. They were the only ones who knew the truth. They were the prison wardens holding the keys to secrets that would drive ordinary people to madness if they knew what was really happening. What makes these experiments even more horrifying is that Vault-Tec itself was destroyed in the nuclear holocaust. There was no one left to observe most of the experiments, to collect the data, to justify the suffering. The vaults simply ran their terrible courses according to their last directives, their residents condemned to endure horrors that would never even be recorded. Now let's descend into the darkness and explore what happened in these underground tombs. Part 2. The Prisons of Isolation. Some experiments focused on humanity's ability to endure prolonged separation from the outside world. These weren't simply about survival in enclosed spaces. They were studies of how isolation warps the mind, corrupts society, and transforms human nature when there's no escape and no hope of rescue. Vault 101, never meant to open. Located in Virginia, just northwest of Washington, D.C., near the settlement of Megaton and the ruins of Springvale, Vault 101 represents perhaps the purest test of isolation's psychological impact. The Vault's unofficial motto says it all: we are born in the Vault, we live in the Vault, and we die in the Vault. Vault 101 was never scheduled to open, ever. Unlike the other vaults that were intended to unseal at some point when Vault-Tec or an appropriate regulatory agency sent an all-clear signal, Vault 101's doors were meant to remain sealed permanently. The vault was supplied with equipment specifically chosen to keep it functioning indefinitely, including spare parts for the water processing system. The first overseer was a Vault-Tec operative who created an elaborate deception immediately after the bombs fell in 27 Saum. To prevent anyone from leaving, he manufactured the illusion that the outside world was an uninhabitable radioactive nightmare with absolutely no hope of survival. Based on information from Vault documentation, he accomplished this through regular fake radio transmissions that had been recorded before the war, creating the impression among residents that the only salvation was within the Vault's metal walls. This first overseer died of natural causes in 2027 at age 84, having groomed a subordinate to continue the cruel experiment. The second overseer not only maintained the isolationist doctrine, but actively recruited senior Vault dwellers to become complicit in the deception, convincing them to teach their children that the outside was an unlivable hellscape. What neither the first nor second overseer realized was that they themselves were test subjects. The experiment had two parts. The first was observing the impact of prolonged isolation and limited genetic variety over multiple generations. The second part tested the role of the overseer itself, gathering data on how someone with absolute power would perform in an environment with no outside oversight or accountability. However, the isolationist policy didn't remain unbroken. Around 2020-41, a different overseer opened Vault 101 and allowed free interaction with the outside world. The Vault established trade relations with the settlement of Megaton and permitted dwellers to travel freely between the Vault and the wasteland. This period of openness lasted for years, with survey teams venturing out and ambassadors stationed in nearby settlements. This openness ended when the overseer who supported outside contact disappeared during an expedition to the wasteland. A young Vault dweller named Alphonse Almodovar, who had grown up believing the Vault should remain sealed, seized the opportunity to assume leadership. Many suspected Alphonse had a hand in the previous overseer's disappearance, but no one challenged his ascension. Alphonse immediately reversed the open-door policy, sealing Vault 101 once again. He convinced or coerced all adult dwellers to pretend the Vault had never been opened, dismissing the previous overseers as idiots who had nearly destroyed the Vault through their naivety. By the time Alphonse took full control sometime before 2258, Vault 101 had transformed into a police state with strict isolationist policies once more. By 2277, the population had dwindled significantly. Alphonse admitted there was enough genetic diversity for only a few more generations, perhaps less than 100 years before inbreeding would doom the Vault entirely. But Alphonse kept the doors sealed anyway. That was his role in the experiment. The deception began to crack when James, a scientist from the wasteland, arrived at the Vault's door around 2258 or 2259 with his infant child, seeking shelter. He proposed becoming the Vault's physician in exchange for entry, and Alphonse granted the request since the Vault desperately lacked medical expertise. James convinced his child, later known as the Lone Wanderer, that they were born in the Vault, maintaining Alphonse's fiction. When James eventually left the Vault to resume his water purification project in the wasteland, violence erupted. Radroaches attacked, security forces battled the Lone Wanderer who was trying to escape, and in the chaos that followed, Vault society fractured. A rebel faction emerged, led by Amata Almodovar, the overseer's daughter. This group, consisting mostly of younger residents, demanded the Vault be open to establish trade with outside settlements and allow limited exploration of the wasteland. They had seen the Lone Wanderer leave and survive. The lie was exposed. Opposing them was Overseer Almodovar and his security forces, who wanted the Vault permanently sealed according to the original experiment. Alphonse received a transmission from the Enclave, requesting access to the vault with a password that no longer worked. He denied their request, which only strengthened his belief in isolation. The situation escalated into armed conflict. The security chief planned a midnight raid with live ammunition to suppress the rebellion by force. Fearing bloodshed, Amata sent an emergency frequency to the lone wanderer, calling them back to help resolve the crisis. The final part of Vault 101's grand experiment was this very conflict. What neither side understood was that the rebellion sparked by exposure to the truth, the violent confrontation between isolation and freedom, was exactly what Vault-Tec had designed the vault to eventually produce. The experiment only truly commenced when the vault door first opened, and knowledge of the outside world shattered 2 centuries of carefully maintained illusion. The lone wanderer's choices determined the vault's fate: negotiate a compromise allowing supervised expeditions, seal the vault permanently, kill either the overseer or rebel leaders, or destroy the reactor and make the vault uninhabitable. Regardless of the choice, Vault 101's experiment ended not with scientific observation, but with human tragedy. Vault 13, the special case. Vault 13 occupies a unique position in Vault-Tec's experimental portfolio. Located in a scenic mountainous region in California, its purpose has been described in different ways by different sources. According to the Enclave's President Richardson, Vault 13 was a control group intended to remain sealed until its subjects were needed by the Enclave. However, according to other documentation, the vault was designed to test the effects of 200 years of prolonged isolation on a human population. These 2 descriptions suggest Vault 13 may have served dual purposes: gathering baseline data while simultaneously testing extreme long-term isolation. Regardless of its exact experimental mandate, Vault 13's fate would set the events of the entire Fallout series into motion. The vault's water purification system depended on a critical component called the water chip, a large circuit board with vacuum tubes that regulated filtration and monitored output for contamination. These chips were manufactured by a low-bid contractor, resulting in poor quality and high failure rates. They were packaged 5 to a box for good reason. Due to a shipping error, Vault 8 received the box of surplus water chips intended for Vault 13, and Vault 13 received Vault 8's second Garden of Eden creation kit instead. This single bureaucratic mistake sealed Vault 13's fate. When the water chip broke in 2061, the situation became an emergency. The vault had approximately 150 days of water reserves remaining. Overseer Jacqueline had already sent out explorers to find a replacement. A man named Ed was one of the first, perishing shortly after stepping outside the vault door. Another, Tallius, was sent out with a shotgun but was captured by super mutants at Necropolis and transformed into one of them. On December 5, 261, at 7:21 a.m., Jacqueline sent out the Vault Dweller with a desperate mission: find a water chip or the vault dies. This quest took the Vault Dweller across the wasteland to the ruins of Vault 15, which had been destroyed and looted, and eventually to Necropolis, the ghoul city built around the ruins of Vault 12. Deep in Vault 12's command center, on the 3rd floor, the Vault Dweller found a working water chip and retrieved it in February 2562. The 150-day time limit was met, Vault 13 was saved, but that salvation came with a terrible price. During the search for the water chip, the Vault Dweller discovered the Master and his army of super mutants. They learned about the forced evolutionary virus and the Master's plan to transform all of humanity into a superior species through forced mutation. Jacqueline immediately sent the Vault Dweller back out to destroy this threat. The Vault Dweller succeeded, killing the Master and destroying the source of super mutants at Mariposa Military Base. They saved not just Vault 13, but potentially all of humanity from forced transformation. And how did Overseer Jacqueline reward this hero? With exile. Jacqueline knew the truth about the vaults, about the experiments, about Vault 13's purpose. He was conscious of the grand social experiment on a massive scale, and he feared the Vault Dweller would ruin it, or, worse, uncover it. The vault dweller had been exposed to too much of the outside world. They had changed. They had seen too much, learned too much, become too much of a wild card. Allowing them back into Vault 13 permanently would invalidate the isolation experiment. So Jacqueline thanked the vault dweller for saving everyone and then told them they could never come home. The vault dweller left, eventually founding the village of Arroyo in Northern California. But Vault 13 itself didn't escape the experiment. The Enclave later studied Vault 13's records, and this research led them to their plan involving the FEV Curling 13 strain, which would become central to the events of Fallout 2. Vault 13 was supposed to be a control group, a simple study of isolation. Instead, it became the epicenter of wasteland history, proving that even the best-laid plans of Vault-Tec could spiral into unintended consequences that echoed through generations. Vault 15, ideology and conflict. If Vault 101 tested isolation and Vault 13 tested duration, then Vault 15 tested human nature itself. Located in California, this vault was an experiment in diversity, but not the kind that builds strength. Vault 15 was deliberately populated with people of radically different ideologies, backgrounds, and belief systems. The experiment's purpose was to observe how these diverse groups would interact when forced into close quarters with no escape. Would they find common ground? Would they learn to coexist? Would they build something new together? They did none of these things. Instead, the vault became a pressure cooker of conflicting worldviews. Different factions formed almost immediately, each convinced of their own righteousness, each viewing the others as obstacles to proper vault governance. The tensions escalated over time until the vault could no longer contain them. Eventually, the residents of Vault 15 abandoned the facility entirely. The factions dispersed into the wasteland where they continued their ideological conflicts in new forms. Some became raiders, preying on the weak. Others formed the core of what would become the new California Republic, one of the wasteland's most powerful civilizations. The Cans, a raider group that would plague the wasteland for generations, traced their origins to Vault 15. The Vipers and Jackals, other raider tribes, similarly emerged from the Vault's fractured society. By the time the Vault Dweller reached Vault 15 in 2161 searching for a water chip, the place was a ruin. The entrance shaft had collapsed. Raiders had picked through whatever remained. The command center lay in ruins with no functional water chip to be found. Vault 15's experiment proved that simply placing different types of people together doesn't create unity. Without shared values, without compromise, without genuine respect for differences, diversity becomes division. The Vault didn't create a new society. It created the seeds of wasteland conflict that would last for centuries. Vault 21, where chance decided everything. Not all isolation experiments were about conflict or deprivation. Vault 21, located beneath the Las Vegas Strip, tested an unusual social structure, a society where all conflict was resolved through games of chance. Every dispute, every decision, every allocation of resources was determined by gambling. Did two people want the same job? Roll the dice. Disagreement about vault policy? Play a hand of cards. The vault was literally built with slot machines and gaming tables integrated into its infrastructure. The experiment examined whether a society could function when chance replaced hierarchy, when luck replaced merit, when gambling replaced governance. For a time, it worked remarkably well. The residents of Vault 21 were generally happy, accepting the randomness as fair because everyone had equal odds. But this democratic egalitarianism couldn't survive contact with the outside world. When Robert House, the pre-war genius who survived the nuclear holocaust in a cryogenic chamber, began reclaiming Las Vegas, he saw Vault 21 as an obstacle to his vision. The Vault's residents, accustomed to settling disputes through gambling, agreed to House's proposal. They would gamble for the ownership of the Vault itself. House won. He couldn't kill the spirit of Vault 21, but he could neuter it. He filled most of the vault with concrete, sealing off the lower levels and converting the entrance into a hotel. The residents were allowed to stay in the upper areas, running a small hotel and gift shop, but their society was effectively destroyed. Sarah Weintraub, one of the original vault dwellers, remained to manage the hotel, a living memorial to a social experiment that proved gambling could indeed govern a society, but couldn't protect it from someone who refused to play fair. 2 POW 3. Radiation, genetics, and medical atrocity. Some of Vault-Tec's experiments weren't about psychology or social dynamics. They were about the human body itself, testing the limits of genetic manipulation, radiation exposure, and medical science with no ethical constraints whatsoever. Vault 12, the broken door. Vault 12 was built in Bakersfield, California, and advertised as one of the best prepared vaults in the entire Vault-Tec fleet, boasting the finest water purification system available. When the bombs fell on October 23, 1977, residents flooded in seeking protection, believing they were among the fortunate few who would survive the nuclear holocaust. They were wrong. Vault 12 had a fatal flaw, and it was entirely deliberate. The vault door was designed to never properly seal. It couldn't close all the way, allowing radiation to continuously leak into the vault's interior. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't an oversight. This was the experiment to study the effects of prolonged low-level radiation exposure on a sealed population. The radiation killed many of the original vault dwellers outright, but those unlucky enough to survive underwent a different transformation. They didn't die. They ghoulified. Ghoulification is a mutation caused by radiation exposure where the body transforms rather than perishes. Ghouls lose cartilage-based features like noses and ears. Their skin becomes leathery, burned, or necrotic. They develop immunity to radiation sickness and can live for centuries, but at the cost of their human appearance and the constant risk of going feral, losing their minds to animalistic rage. The survivors of Vault 12 left the facility in 2083, just 6 years after the bombs fell. Many stayed in the area, founding the ghoul-run city of Necropolis around the vault's ruins. Said. One of the ghoul leaders eventually took control of the Necropolis underground, ruling with an iron fist over both ghouls and the remaining sections of Vault 12. By 2161, when the vault dweller arrived searching for a water chip, Necropolis had become a strange, segregated society. Surface ghouls lived in the ruins. Underground ghouls controlled the vault. Super mutants periodically raided the area, capturing ghouls for unknown purposes. The water chip the vault dweller needed was in the vault's command center on the 3rd floor, still functional despite the radiation that had transformed everyone who once maintained it. Retrieving that chip meant navigating through ghoul territory, facing the consequences of Vault-Tec's casual cruelty. If the vault dweller gave the chip to Set, he would demand its return, sending a ghoul to run away with it back to the command center, allowing the chip to be retrieved again. But if the vault dweller completed their main quest and killed the master more than 30 days after taking the chip, super mutants would invade Necropolis and slaughter everyone, ending the city's strange existence. Vault 12's experiment was brutal in its simplicity. Vault-Tec wanted to know what would happen if people were exposed to constant radiation. The answer was suffering, mutation, and the creation of an entire subspecies of humanity that would be feared and persecuted for centuries. Vault 87, the birth of monsters. If Vault 12 created ghouls through passive radiation exposure, Vault 87 created super mutants through active, deliberate genetic warfare. Located northwest of Little Lamplight in the Capital Wasteland, Vault 87 began construction in May 2066 and finished in December 2071. It was equipped with non-standard equipment including 4 stasis chambers, a plasma containment field, 6 food processing stations, and a Garden of Eden creation kit. The computer system was a Cyberbrain V2.3 powered by a General Atomics nuclear reactor with a backup fusion generator. Originally, Vault 87 had a different experimental mandate, but around 2076, that experiment was scrapped entirely. The vault was converted into a secondary research center for studying the effects of the forced evolutionary virus on humans. Dr. Wayne Merrick was assigned to oversee what became known as the Evolutionary Experimentation Program. The FEV was a pre-war military bioweapon developed at Mariposa Military Base designed to create enhanced soldiers. Vault-87 received a modified strain to conduct its own experiments. When residents arrived in 2077, they had no idea they were walking into a laboratory where they would become test subjects. The experiments began almost immediately. Residents were forcefully taken to secure sections of the vault, locked in airtight chambers, and exposed to concentrated FEV. The overseer and security force didn't understand what to expect. They were simply following the plan. Dr. Merrick's terminal entries document the transformation process with clinical detachment that makes the horror even worse. After 3 days of FEV seal exposure, both male and female subjects began transforming to an almost asexual state, becoming similar in muscular structure. By day 10, subjects' skin had morphed to become thicker and more resilient, which Merrick noted could prove useful in combat situations. But the virus devastated cognitive function. Most subjects experienced massive loss of brain function, preventing them from sustaining even their body's basic needs. They expired, their minds destroyed before their bodies could complete transformation. Those who survived the process became super mutants, massive creatures standing approximately 10.4 feet tall when not hunching, weighing around 800 pounds. They possessed incredible strength and durability, but significantly reduced intelligence. The modified FEV strain used at Vault-87 created super mutants who grew larger, stronger, and dumber as they aged. According to medical records found in the vault, 87 deaths were listed as unexplained or undefined before the experiments lost control. Only 6 deaths were marked as natural or accidental. The remaining residents grew uneasy as people disappeared into the medical wing and either died or emerged as monsters. One resident, Peter Stevens, had his son Jason taken for experimentation. Peter's terminal entries chronicle his mental deterioration as he realized something terrible was happening. He refused medication the medical staff offered to calm him, unable to process the horror unfolding around him. Eventually, the super mutants retained enough intelligence to overpower Vault security and take control of Vault-87. They discovered that they were sterile, unable to reproduce through normal means. Their only method of preserving their species was to capture more humans and expose them to FEV, creating more super mutants. For nearly 200 years, this became the super mutant survival strategy. They kidnapped wastelanders and dragged them back to Vault-87's chambers, exposing them to the green stuff as they called it. They didn't understand the science. They only knew it was necessary for their species to continue. One notable exception was Fawkes, a super mutant who retained or somehow recovered his cognitive abilities. Locked in the Vault's medical wing, Fawkes used a terminal connection to access Vault-87's mainframe. Educating himself and developing articulate speech, he became one of the few super mutants capable of meaningful communication and moral reasoning. By 2277, when the lone wanderer arrived seeking a Garden of Eden creation kit, the Vault's main entrance was a cesspool of lethal radiation, reading up to 2,910 rads per second, instant death. The only entry point was through little lamplights' underground passages. Inside, super mutants of various types patrolled the decaying corridors. Grunts, brutes, masters, and even behemoths, the massive super mutants so strong and savage that other super mutants feared them. The Vault had become a spawning ground for the Capital Wasteland's super mutant population. Vault-87's experiment proved that FEV could transform humans into powerful soldiers, but at the cost of their humanity, their intelligence, their ability to reproduce, and ultimately, their understanding of what they had become. The super mutants created there didn't want to be monsters. They were victims of Vault-Tec's quest for data, transformed against their will into creatures that would terrorize the wasteland for centuries. Vault-75, the children's nightmare, hidden beneath Malden Middle School, Vault-75 represented one of Vault-Tec's most disturbing experiments, the systematic genetic refinement of humanity through selective breeding, hormonal treatments, and genetic modification using children as test subjects. The vault was portrayed to local families as a quick, safe shelter for school children if nuclear war began. Parents were told it was the best way to protect their kids from the bombs. On October 23, 2077, when the sirens wailed, parents and children flooded into the vault beneath the school. Upon arrival, adults and children were separated. The children were told this was temporary, just to get everyone processed and assigned living quarters. The parents were told they needed to complete some paperwork in a different section. The adults were executed, all of them. Any children who refused to be separated from their families were also killed. The survivors were raised by the vault's scientific staff with a carefully constructed lie. They were told horror stories about Uptopland, the radiation-scorched wasteland above, a place so terrible that death was the only mercy. The children were conditioned to believe the vault was the only safe place in the world. Meanwhile, the scientists began their work. Vault 75's purpose was refinement of human genetics to create superior specimens. Children underwent rigorous physical training to develop strength and endurance. Those who showed promise received advanced education and specialized training. Those who didn't meet the standards were deemed failures. On their 18th birthday, children were told they would leave the vault to help rebuild the devastated world above. It was presented as a graduation, an honor, a purpose. The reality was far darker. Those who reached 18 were killed, their genetic material harvested for the breeding program. To prevent running out of test subjects, the vault doctors experimented with cultivating human embryos. Children were literally manufactured, products of genetic engineering designed to optimize specific traits. The vault continued this cycle for years, creating generation after generation of children who knew nothing but the vault, the training, the lies, and ultimately the execution chamber disguised as a gateway to heroism. Eventually, something went wrong. The terminal entries cut off. The exact fate of Vault 75 scientists and their final generation of test subjects remains unknown, but when the facility was later discovered, it was abandoned, silent, filled only with the echoes of children who never got the chance to be anything but experiments. Vault 81, the disease laboratory. Not every medical experiment was about transformation or enhancement. Some were about disease. Vault 81, located in the Commonwealth, was designed to develop a universal cure for every sickness humanity could possibly suffer from. The catch? The residents would be the unwitting test subjects. Vault 81 was divided into two sections, the regular vault where residents lived and a secret observation area where Vault-Tec's scientific team would observe the vault dwellers and conduct research. The two sections were connected by a secret elevator in the lobby and a hidden door in the reactor room. The plan was simple and horrifying. The scientists would introduce various diseases to the vault population through the ventilation system, observe the symptoms and progression, develop treatments, test those treatments on the infected residents, and repeat. The vault dwellers would never know they were being deliberately infected, but the experiment never fully commenced as planned. The original overseer, upon learning the true nature of Vault 81's experimental mandate, made a choice. She actively sabotaged Vault-Tec's orders, refusing to conduct the experiments. She kept the secret section sealed and maintained the vault as a legitimate shelter. This act of defiance meant Vault 81 became one of the few functional, thriving vaults in the wasteland. By 2287, 2 centuries after the bombs fell, the vault still had a healthy population living normal lives, unaware of the secret section and the horror that had almost befallen them. However, the secret vault didn't remain empty. The scientists trapped there had still conducted their disease research, using mole rats as test subjects instead of humans. These lab mole rats were infected with various experimental diseases. Over the centuries, the scientists died, but the mole rats survived and bred, creating a colony infected with the diseases used in the original experiments. The secret vault became overrun with these creatures, a nest of plague carriers living just beyond the vault residents' knowledge. In 2287, a vault dweller named Bobby DeLuca discovered one of the entrances to the secret vault and used it to hide his drugs. A young boy, Austin Engill, witnessed Bobby opening the door and went inside to investigate. He was bitten by one of the infected lab mole rats. The disease Austin contracted was unlike anything in the Vault's medical database. It would be lethal for his young immune system without treatment. The Vault's doctor, realizing the bite came from somewhere inside the Vault, but unable to explain how, asked the sole survivor to investigate. Inside the secret vault, the sole survivor encountered Curie, a Miss Nanny robot who had been the scientist's assistant. Curie had continued their work in isolation for 2 centuries, developing treatments and cures. She had 1 dose of a universal cure left, the last unexpired sample from the original research. This created an ethical dilemma. If the sole survivor had been bitten by the infected mole rats during the exploration, they would contract the disease too. The mole rat disease permanently reduced maximum health by 10 points. There was only 1 cure. 2 people needed it. The choice was simple: save yourself or save the child. Using the cure on Austin would save his life and earn the sole survivor a room in Vault 81, making them an honored member of the community. Using it on yourself would leave Austin to die and earn the animosity of every Vault resident. The decision revealed something about the nature of Vault-Tec's experiments. Even when an experiment was sabotaged, even when it never occurred as planned, the equipment and consequences remained, waiting to create new ethical nightmares generations later. Vault 81 proved that the best intentions couldn't erase the fundamental cruelty built into Vault-Tec's designs. The Vault was saved by a compassionate overseer, but the shadow of its intended purpose lingered in the secret halls, in the infected mole rats, in the impossible choice between self-preservation and heroic sacrifice. Part 4, the depths of psychological torture. While some vaults tested physical endurance or genetic limits, others probed the human mind's breaking points, creating scenarios designed to shatter sanity, destroy morality, and document how people respond when faced with impossible choices and inescapable horror. Vault 11, the annual sacrifice. Deep in the Mojave wasteland, west of Boulder City, sits Vault 11, home to perhaps the cruelest social experiment Vault-Tec ever devised. This vault forced its residents to elect 1 person each year to die, with the threat that failure to sacrifice someone would result in everyone's death. When the vault's occupants first arrived and the doors sealed behind them on October 23, 2077, the overseer delivered the terrible news. Every year, the residents would vote for 1 person to be executed. If they refused, the vault's life support systems would shut down and everyone would die. To ensure compliance, the vault was equipped with automated systems capable of carrying out the threat. Imagine the horror of that first announcement. You've just escaped nuclear annihilation. You believe you're safe. Then you learn that safety has a price. Every year, 1 of you must die, and you must choose who. The residents struggled with this impossible situation. At first, they tried to make the sacrifice meaningful, nominating those who were already sick or elderly, people who might have limited time left anyway. But this rationalization only made the moral horror more palatable temporarily. Over time, the sacrifice became politicized. Factions formed. The voting process became a weapon. People nominated their enemies, their rivals, those they disliked. The annual sacrifice transformed from a survival necessity into a tool for settling grudges and consolidating power. Then it became institutionalized. A political bloc called the Justice Bloc took control, nominating people based on their own criteria of who deserved to die. Their opponents, the rebel faction, fought back. Vault politics became a matter of literal life and death. At some point, someone discovered a loophole in the system. If you made a person overseer, they would automatically be selected for that year's sacrifice. This meant the overseer position, normally a role of power, became a death sentence. No one wanted to be overseer. This led to Vault 11's darkest period. Certain factions used sex as a political tool. They would agree to vote as a bloc to protect someone from sacrifice, but only if that person slept with them first or if their family member did. This coerced prostitution became a key part of Vault politics. The terminal entries tell a story of complete moral decay. One woman's husband was chosen as overseer, which meant execution. She was approached by members of the Justice Bloc who promised they would vote to override his selection if she agreed to their demands. She refused, and her husband died. Later, she ran for overseer herself, won, and used her position to expose the Justice Bloc's corruption before her own execution. The violence escalated. There were murders, assassinations, riots. The population dwindled, not just from the annual sacrifice, but from people killing each other outside the official system. Terminal entries describe massive civil unrest, with factions literally going to war. Eventually, only 5 people remained alive in Vault 11. These 5 survivors faced their moment of truth. It was time for another vote, but they were exhausted. They were traumatized. They couldn't do it anymore. They refused to vote. They prepared for the life support systems to shut down and kill them all. Instead, a pre-recorded message played. It congratulated them for their commitment to human life. The sacrifice had never been necessary. It was all a test to see how long people would comply with an immoral order simply because they were told their survival depended on it. The vault door unlocked. They were free. They could leave any time with the overseer's permission, but the revelation was too much. Based on what remained in the vault's terminals, the 5 survivors appear to have had a psychological breakdown. 4 of them died violently, with evidence suggesting either mutual killings or suicide. Only 1 person may have left the vault alive, though their ultimate fate remains unknown. Vault 11's experiment answered a terrible question. How long will people commit murder if they believe their survival depends on it? The answer was, until almost everyone is dead. The most horrifying aspect is that if the residents had refused from the very beginning, if they had called the vault's bluff on that first day, everyone would have lived. The experiment only worked because people obeyed, because they believed the threat, because they valued survival more than morality. Vault 11 stands as a monument to the banality of evil, to the way ordinary people can be manipulated into committing atrocities when they're afraid, when they're isolated, when they're told it's necessary. Vault 19, paranoia by design. While Vault 11 tested obedience to immoral authority, Vault 19 in the Mojave Wasteland tested something more subtle and insidious, the deliberate creation of paranoia through non-chemical, non-violent means. Vault 19 was unique in having 2 overseers and 2 completely separate living sections within the same vault. Residents were divided into the red sector and the blue sector, each with their own overseer, their own living quarters, their own facilities. Contact between the 2 groups was deliberately limited. The residents had no idea this division was part of the experiment. They assumed it was simply how the vault was organized, perhaps for efficiency or safety reasons. What they didn't know was that both overseers were working together to psychologically torture them. The experiment involved inducing paranoia without using drugs or physical violence. The overseers employed various techniques documented in terminal entries throughout the vault. Subliminal messages were played through the PA system at frequencies just barely audible. Strange, unexplained noises echoed through the ventilation systems. Lights would flicker in patterns that seemed almost like code. Equipment would malfunction in suspicious ways. The residents of the red sector began to believe the blue sector was responsible for the disturbances. The blue sector residents blamed the red sector. Both groups were wrong. It was the overseers, working together, creating artificial incidents designed to provoke suspicion and fear. Patient records found in the vault document the psychological effects. Residents reported symptoms of acute paranoia, psychosis, and aggressive tendencies. Some heard voices. Others became convinced their neighbors were plotting against them. The line between genuine mechanical problems and manufactured incidents became impossible to distinguish. The experiment was remarkably effective. Without any chemical agents or physical abuse, Vault-Tec's researchers proved they could drive people to paranoid delusions simply through environmental manipulation and the power of suggestion. What happened to Vault 19's residents remains a mystery. By 2281, when a group of escaped convicts discovered the vault, it had already been abandoned for some time. The convicts used the facility as a base for their powder ganger operations, unaware of the psychological experiments that had occurred there. Did the residents destroy each other in paranoid violence? Did the overseers eventually reveal the truth, driving everyone to flee the vault? Did the experiment simply run its course until the vault could no longer sustain the population? The terminals don't provide answers, only fragments of suffering, notes about hallucinations, reports of escalating violence between sectors, medical records showing deteriorating mental health across the entire population. Vault 19 proved that you don't need drugs or torture chambers to break the human mind. Sometimes all you need is isolation, limited information, and a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological manipulation. The human brain will do the rest, creating threats where none exist, seeing patterns where there's only chaos, destroying trust and replacing it with fear. Vault 77, one man and his puppets. If Vault 19 demonstrated how to drive groups insane, Vault 77 explored what happens when you isolate a single person with nothing but inanimate objects for company. This Vault's experiment was brutally simple. Seal one man inside with only a crate of puppets and observe what happens. Vault 77 was constructed in a small cave, though its exact location remains largely unknown in the wasteland. The story of this vault comes from an official Fallout webcomic created by Penny Arcade in collaboration with Fallout 3's lead designer, Emil Pagliarulo, making it canon to the Fallout universe despite not appearing as an explorable location in the games. On October 23, 2077, when the bombs fell, one man entered the vault. The vault door was designed to automatically close behind him and remained sealed for months. Initially, the man believed there had been a mistake. He screamed at the door, "Hey, you forgot all the other fucking people!" He pleaded for others to be let in. He thought surely someone would realize the error and open the door. No one came. For over a year, from October 21, 2077, through most of 2078 and into 2079, this man lived alone in Vault 77. The first months were panic and depression. Terminal entries track his deteriorating mental state as isolation took its toll. On March 21, 2078, 5 months into his isolation, he was found crying in front of the vault door, begging to be let out, but he still hadn't touched the crate of puppets. He avoided them, perhaps understanding on some level that using them would mean accepting his situation as permanent. He held out until February 4, 2079, 1 year, 3 months, and 12 days after the vault sealed. Finally, he opened the crate marked P13X, U.S. government issue puppet ration. Inside were hand puppets of various types, a dog, a king, a grandmother, and others. He began playing with them, probably just to have something to do, to fill the crushing silence and emptiness. Within weeks, the puppets became his world. By March 30, 2079, he had completely personified them. The dog puppet was Reverend Hound, serving as sheriff and part-time reverend. The old woman puppet was Grandma, who made him pies. The king puppet was called the King, and they celebrated its birthday together. Then the Vault Boy puppet started talking to him. This puppet, overlooked initially when he first opened the crate, began communicating with him. The other puppets didn't speak, but Vault Boy did. This was clearly a hallucination, a symptom of isolation-induced psychosis, but to the man in Vault 77, it was completely real. That night, March 30, 2079, the king was found murdered, its head ripped off. The man confronted Vault Boy, asking if the puppet had committed the murder. Vault Boy confessed, but claimed the man himself was complicit. They had done it together, Vault Boy insisted. They needed to flee before Reverend Hound discovered the crime. The man, now fully dissociated from reality, accepted this logic. He opened the vault door, stepping outside for the first time since the bombs fell. He encountered a rad scorpion the size of a Boeing 747, holding cars in its claws. He immediately closed the door and decided to sleep on it. Eventually, he ventured out again, this time successfully. He tamed a giant ant he named Mr. Pinch and rode it across the wasteland. At some point, he acquired other puppets, and continued his descent into madness. The Puppet Man, as he became known, eventually encountered slavers. They debated whether to enslave him or eat him. He tried to warn them about the Vault Boy puppet, saying it was crazy and had killed before. They didn't listen. That night, the Puppet Man, with Vault Boy's help, murdered every slaver in the camp. The wasteland had gained a new legend, a mysterious killer covered in blood, accompanied by puppets, capable of terrifying violence. By 2277, when Fallout 3 takes place, the Puppet Man had become a boogeyman. Slavers at Paradise Falls had acquired a Vault 77 jumpsuit and kept it in their barracks. A holotape near it urged whoever found it to burn the jumpsuit. The slavers were terrified that if they kept it, the Puppet Man might return looking for it. One Gary clone, Gary 23, was captured by the Brotherhood of Steel outcasts, who wanted his Pip-Boy to access a simulation pod. They amputated his arm to get the device, but even this gruesome procedure was overshadowed by their fear when they realized the jumpsuit he wore was from Vault 77. Vault 77's experiment was never observed by Vault-Tec. No data was collected. The scientists who designed it were dead, vaporized in the nuclear holocaust. But the experiment ran anyway, transforming one man into a legend of horror that would terrorize the wasteland for 2 centuries. The Puppet Man's fate is unknown. Given the timeline, he likely died of old age or radiation exposure long before Fallout 3, but the fear he inspired lived on, proving that Vault-Tec's cruelest experiments weren't just about collecting data. They were about breaking human beings to see what emerged from the wreckage. Vault 106, Pharmaceutical Nightmare. If Vault 77 drove a man insane through isolation, Vault 106 in the Capital Wasteland took a more direct approach. It simply pumped drugs into the air and watched what happened to the residents. Located in the Capital Wasteland, Vault 106 was designed with a special modification to its ventilation system. The experiment was straightforward. Introduce psychoactive drugs through the air circulation, observe the effects on the population, and document the results. The drugs caused severe paranoia and increased violent tendencies. Unlike Vault 19's subtle environmental manipulation, Vault 106's chemical approach was brutally effective. The residents had no chance to resist. With every breath, they inhaled substances that warped their perception, destroyed their judgment, and amplified their worst impulses. Terminal entries and environmental storytelling paint a picture of rapid deterioration. Residents began seeing things that weren't there. They attacked each other over imagined slights. Trust evaporated. Violence erupted. The vault descended into chaos. By the time the experiment ended, whether through depletion of the drug supply, death of all residents, or some other conclusion, Vault 106 was abandoned and filled with hostile hallucinations or feral ghouls, depending on the exact timeline. By 2277, when the lone wanderer could potentially explore the vault, it remained a dangerous place. The atmosphere itself seemed tainted. Players exploring Vault 106 in Fallout 3 experienced visual hallucinations, suggesting the drugs may have contaminated the environment permanently, or that the ventilation system continues to pump trace amounts of psychoactive chemicals. Vault 106 wasn't about complex social dynamics or elaborate psychological manipulation. It was a simple question: what happens if you drug an entire population against their will and watch them descend into madness? The answer, documented in blood and abandoned corridors, was exactly what any ethical scientist could have predicted. The experiment was pointless cruelty, producing data that could have been extrapolated from existing pharmaceutical research, but Vault-Tec conducted it anyway because they could, because there was no oversight, because the residents had no choice. Vault 92, The Sound of Madness. Vault 92, also in the Capital Wasteland, presents another variation on mind control experimentation. This vault was advertised as a shelter specifically for preserving America's greatest musical talents for future generations. Musicians, composers, and other musical virtuosos were promised safety in exchange for their art. They would continue creating music within the vault, preserving culture during the dark times, ensuring that when humanity emerged, the arts would survive. This was a lie. Vault 92's true purpose was to perfect white noise suggestion techniques and subliminal messaging as a form of mind control. The Vault's designers installed special equipment capable of emitting low-frequency sounds imperceptible to conscious perception, but capable of influencing behavior and planting suggestions in the subconscious mind. The experiment was meant to create the perfect sleeper agent, someone who could be programmed through sound to follow commands without conscious awareness of the manipulation. The military applications were obvious. Imagine soldiers who could be given complex instructions through innocuous music, or civilians who could be pacified through environmental audio. The Vault's overseer and select staff knew the truth. The musicians did not. They continued composing, performing, recording, unaware that every note they played was being interwoven with psychoactive frequencies designed to rewrite their minds. The experiment worked, but not as intended. The white noise and subliminal suggestions did affect the musicians. They began experiencing severe psychological side effects: paranoia, violent outbursts, auditory hallucinations. But instead of becoming controllable, they became unpredictable and dangerous. The breaking point came when the musicians collectively experienced psychotic breaks. Terminal entries describe the Vault's final days with clinical horror. The musicians, driven mad by the constant bombardment of subliminal manipulation, turned on their overseers and the Vault's staff. Violence erupted throughout the facility. The musicians, many of whom had no combat training, nonetheless overwhelmed the security forces through sheer numbers and frenzied aggression. The experiment had created berserkers instead of sleeper agents. By 2277, Vault 92 was abandoned and dangerous. Mirror lurks had taken up residence in the flooded sections. The Vault's audio equipment still functioned, playing fragments of pre-war music interwoven with the same white noise frequencies that had driven the musicians insane. The lone wanderer exploring the Vault could find terminal entries documenting the experiment, holotapes of musical performances, and the scattered remains of both musicians and staff. The Vault stood as a monument to the hubris of believing you could control the human mind through sound alone. Vault 92 proved that even seemingly harmless stimuli like music could become weapons when weaponized by people without ethical constraints. The musicians who thought they were preserving culture became test subjects in an experiment that destroyed their minds and ultimately claimed their lives. Part 5: Cloning, Biology, and Scientific Abominations. Beyond psychology, Vault-Tec pushed the boundaries of biological science, creating experiments that tested genetic manipulation, cloning, and the development of new life forms with consequences that echoed through the wasteland for generations. Located south of Canterbury Commons in the Capital Wasteland, Vault 108 represents one of Vault-Tec's most bizarre experiments, one that might have been designed to test leadership dynamics but resulted in something far stranger. Construction began on Vault 108 in March 2061 but was cut short in December 2069 due to work stoppage, leaving it partially completed. The vault was designed for 475 residents with a projected operational lifetime of 38 years. But the experiment itself was unusual from the start. The premise involved deliberately leaving most standard vault positions unfilled. Only 3 roles were assigned before the vault sealed: Chief of Security, Chief of Staff, and Morale Officer. The overseer would need to fill all other positions personally, creating a power vacuum and testing how leadership structures form in crisis situations. To make the experiment more volatile, the vault was supplied with 3 times the normal weaponry but lacked standard entertainment options. The power supply was designed to fail 20 years after the vault closed. Add these stressors together and you have a recipe for social breakdown. But Vault 108 had another element, one that wasn't part of the official Vault-Tec documentation found in the Citadel terminals. Someone within the vault, whether vault leadership or scientific staff operating independently, decided to conduct cloning experiments. The subject was a man named Gary. Terminal entries and holotapes found in the Vault's cloning lab document what happened. Gary was cloned repeatedly, with each clone exhibiting increasing hostility toward non-clones. Gary 1, Gary 2, Gary 3, and onwards, each more aggressive than the last. The holotape describes the scientists' growing concern. By Gary 53, the observation rooms were filling up with hostile clones. Gary 54 injured Dr. Peterson during an examination, prompting the staff to discuss disposing of some clones to make room for continued experimentation. What the scientists failed to understand was that they had created a ticking time bomb. The Gary clones, despite their increasing aggression, had also developed their own form of communication. They could convey complex emotions and intentions through variations in how they said their own name. Gary, Gary, Gary. Each inflection, each tone carried meaning. The clones rebelled. They overwhelmed the scientists and security forces, killing everyone who wasn't a Gary. The Vault became their domain, a strange colony of identical men who could only say one word but had somehow formed a functional society. When the lone wanderer discovers Vault 108 in 2277, roughly 200 years after the bombs fell, Gary clones still inhabit the facility. This raises questions that the game never answers. The clones appear to have survived for 2 centuries, but cloning technology doesn't typically grant longevity. Whether they somehow achieved extended lifespans, continued cloning themselves, or represent multiple generations of clones remains purely speculative. The Gary clones are hostile to all non-Garys, attacking on sight with whatever weapons they can find. Most are unarmed, using only their fists, but a few have acquired knives or lead pipes. They inhabit the living quarters and cloning lab, which are in an advanced state of disrepair with water leaks and rust. One Gary, designated Gary 23, was captured by the Brotherhood of Steel outcasts near Bailey's Crossroads. The outcasts needed a Pip-Boy to access a simulation pod, and Gary 23 was wearing one. They attempted to coax him into the pod, but Gary 23 could only say Gary in various tones. Unable to communicate, the outcast resorted to amputation, cutting off Gary 23's left arm to retrieve the hermetically sealed device. Gary 23's fate after this brutality is unknown, but his body was found in the outcast outpost, a victim of the wasteland's casual cruelty. Vault 108 raises disturbing questions about the nature of the experiment. Was the cloning always part of the plan? Did Vault-Tec authorize it? Or did Vault scientists pursue their own research agenda? Why Gary specifically? What made him suitable for cloning? The most unsettling aspect is the Garys themselves. They've created a society, however primitive, based entirely on variations of one word. They've survived for 200 years through unknown means. They've developed the ability to communicate complex ideas through tone alone. Are they still human? Are they a new species? Are they individuals? Or are they all the same person, duplicated dozens of times? Vault 108 offers no answers, only the endless echo of Gary, reverberating through abandoned corridors, a testament to an experiment that spiraled far beyond its creator's intentions. Vault 22, the Green Hell, moving west to the Mojave Wasteland. Vault 22 represents a different kind of biological experiment, one that began with noble intentions and ended with botanical horror. Unlike most vaults, Vault 22 was not designed to house a civilian population. Instead, it was staffed entirely by scientists and horticulturalists dedicated to agricultural research. The Vault's stated purpose was to develop methods of maximizing crop yield in arid environments, combating global hunger through innovative farming techniques. The entrance sign describes the work conducted within, research ranging from crop production in arid biomes to increasing plant resistance to insects, drought, and disease. It was marketed as the cutting edge of agricultural science, a beacon of hope for feeding the world. Inside, the vault was equipped with extensive growing facilities. Multiple levels contained gardens, greenhouses, and experimental growing chambers. The scientists had access to advanced fertilizers, pest control systems, and experimental plant strains designed to thrive in harsh conditions. One of their research projects focused on a fungus called Beauveria mordicana, designed for pest control. The fungus had been developed at Big MT's X22 Botanical Garden and transferred to Vault-22 for further experimentation. In theory, it would target and eliminate crop pests while leaving the plants unharmed. In practice, it became a nightmare. During post-war experimentation, the fungus became airborne. Its spores gradually spread throughout the vault, infiltrating the ventilation systems. At first, no one noticed the danger. The fungus was supposed to be harmless to humans, after all. Then residents began coughing. Dr. Harrison Peters was the first confirmed infection. His medical records document the progression. Initial symptoms resembling pneumonia as the fungus invaded his lungs, followed by chills, fever, and a terrible racking cough. His body actively rejected antifungal treatments as if the fungus had learned to defend itself. Eventually, he died from organ failure. The autopsy revealed the horrifying truth. Peter's lungs were filled with fungal growth, and it was still expanding, still spreading. But the fungus didn't stop at death. It continued colonizing the body, growing through organs, nervous system, muscles, until it achieved something terrible: control over the deceased person's corpse. The dead rose as spore carriers. These creatures were no longer human. They were ambulatory hosts for the fungal colony, mindless monsters whose only purpose was spreading more spores. They attacked the living, spreading infection, creating more carriers. The vault descended into biological chaos. As the infection spread, residents attempted to fight back. They tried burning out infected areas, gassing entire sections of the vault, sealing off contaminated zones. Nothing worked. The spore carriers were too numerous, too resilient, too relentless. Eventually, the surviving residents fled the vault. They escaped into the wasteland, carrying fungal spores with them. Some traveled north, eventually reaching Zion Canyon in Utah. There, the infection spread to the local population, creating more spore carriers and contaminating the natural environment. The Vault-22 dwellers who reached Zion established a temporary camp in a cave, but the infection followed them. Terminal entries from other survivors in the area document an unknown sickness that killed more than 80 members of the group. In desperation and starvation, the survivors resorted to cannibalism, eating their own dead. The Sorrows tribe in Zion later told stories of the skull-headed figures from Vault-22, passed down through generations. The number 22 appeared in their cliff murals, a warning to future generations about the danger from the vault. By 2281, when the courier arrives in the Mojave, Vault-22 is a green hell. The entrance is choked with overgrowth. Giant mantises patrol the exterior, having nested among the plants. The vault door stands open, lodged in place by vegetation. Inside, the facility is overrun with plant life, spore carriers, and giant mantises. The different floors require navigating through thick vegetation, hostile creatures, and unstable infrastructure. Spore plants, mutated Venus flytraps, have taken root throughout the vault, spitting acidic projectiles at anything that moves. The new California Republic's Office of Science and Industry took interest in Vault-22's research. Director Thomas Hildern hired mercenaries to retrieve the agricultural data stored within, hoping to enhance NCR food production and stave off projected famine. None of the mercenaries returned. Eventually, a ghoul scientist named Keeley went to investigate personally. She became trapped in the lower levels when giant mantises knocked her unconscious. The courier's assistance was needed to rescue her and make a terrible choice: preserve the vault's data for potential agricultural benefits or destroy everything to prevent the spores from spreading further. If the data is destroyed, Keeley helps the courier activate gas pumps throughout the vault, flooding it with combustible gas. The ignition destroys the remaining spore carriers, spore plants, and fungal colonies, effectively sterilizing the vault, but also eliminating potentially valuable research. If the data is preserved, the fungal contamination remains a threat. The spores could escape, could spread to other populations, could create more spore carriers. The agricultural knowledge might feed millions, or it might doom them to fungal infection. Vault-22 proves that even well-intentioned research can become catastrophic when conducted without adequate safety measures. The scientists wanted to feed the world. Instead, they created a plague that turned the dead into weapons for spreading infection, a biological horror that spread across hundreds of miles and endured for over 2 centuries. Part 6: Power, Weapons, and Social Collapse. Not all experiments focused on biology or psychology. Some examined how access to power, weapons, or special privileges would affect isolated populations over extended periods. Vault-3, the Raiders' Prize. Vault-3 in the Mojave Wasteland was intended as a control vault, a standard shelter with no experimental parameters beyond the baseline data collection common to all vaults. It was designed to house residents safely, keep them alive during the nuclear holocaust, and eventually open when conditions on the surface improved. For a time, it functioned exactly as designed. The vault, sealed on schedule, protected its residents from the bombs and maintained a stable population. 20 years after the Great War, in 2097, the vault received the all-clear signal and opened its doors. The residents faced a choice: venture into the unknown wasteland or remain in the safety of the vault. They chose caution, keeping the vault sealed despite the clearance to leave. For over a century and a half, they maintained their underground society, occasionally sending scouts to observe the surface, but never committing to permanent exodus. This changed in 2281 when an unplanned water leak forced a crisis. The vault systems, worn down after 2 centuries of operation, suffered a critical failure. The residents couldn't repair it with available materials. They had to leave the vault to trade with surface dwellers, hoping to acquire the parts and expertise needed to fix the leak. They opened the vault's doors and sought peaceful contact with the locals. They encountered the fiends. The fiends were not traders. They were not diplomats. They were a raider gang hopped up on chems, desperate for shelter, armed and violent. When they saw the vault dwellers emerging from their pristine underground facility, they saw easy prey and a perfect base of operations. The fiends slaughtered every resident of Vault-3. The massacre was total. Men, women, children, all killed. 2 centuries of careful preservation, of maintaining civilization in isolation, of protecting a community across generations, ended in blood and screams. The fiends moved into Vault-3, converting it into their headquarters. They used the living quarters for themselves, storing weapons, drugs, and captured victims throughout the facility. Motor Runner, the fiend leader, set up operations in the vault, making it the center of fiend activity in the Mojave. By the time the courier explores Vault-3, it's a raider den filled with drug-addled killers. The vault that survived the Great War, that weathered 2 centuries of isolation, that emerged intact into the wasteland, became home to the worst elements of post-nuclear society. Vault-3's tragedy wasn't an experiment gone wrong. It was proof that even when everything goes right, even when a vault functions perfectly, the wasteland can destroy in moments what took generations to preserve. The control vault became a memorial to the naive belief that civilization and compassion would survive contact with the lawless brutality of post-apocalyptic America. Vault-34, an arsenal's consequence. If Vault-3 showed what happens when peaceful people meet violent raiders, Vault-34 examined what happens when you give an isolated population an excessive supply of weapons and see if they'll use them on each other. Located in the Mojave Wasteland, Vault-34 was deliberately overstocked with armaments. The vault contained far more weapons than any defensive needs could justify. Guns, ammunition, explosives, all readily accessible to the residents. The experiment's premise was simple. Given unlimited access to weapons, would people resort to violence to solve problems? The vault also had a reactor that would prove critical to its fate, though not in the way Vault-Tec intended. For years, Vault-34 functioned despite the weapons. The residents managed their conflicts through non-violent means, maintaining social order even with an arsenal at their fingertips. The experiment seemed to be failing. Humans weren't as violent as Vault-Tec expected, but the situation changed when divisions formed over the vault's future. Some residents wanted to leave, to explore the wasteland, to establish contact with surface communities. Others insisted on staying sealed, maintaining isolation. The overseer sided with the isolationists. Those who wanted to leave became increasingly frustrated. Arguments escalated. Tensions rose, and they had access to guns. Eventually, a group of residents who wanted to leave attempted to force open the vault. The overseer refused. The rebels, armed with weapons from the vault's overstocked armory, resorted to violence. They attacked the overseer and his supporters, trying to seize control of the vault door. The fighting damaged the vault's reactor. Radiation began leaking throughout the facility. The contamination spread rapidly, making large sections of the vault uninhabitable. Both sides of the conflict were forced to abandon the areas near the reactor, but by then, the damage was done. Some residents managed to escape the vault, fleeing into the wasteland. They eventually formed the Boomers, a faction that settled at Nellis Air Force Base. The Boomers inherited Vault 34's weapons obsession, stockpiling explosives and artillery, using overwhelming firepower to defend their territory from outsiders. Those who remained in Vault 34 weren't so lucky. The radiation killed many outright. Others ghoulified, transformed into feral creatures that haunted the irradiated corridors. By 2281, the vault was overrun with feral ghouls, the descendants or transformed versions of residents who couldn't or wouldn't leave. The courier, exploring Vault 34, navigates through heavily irradiated areas filled with ghouls and scattered weapons. The vault's reactor continues leaking, making extended exploration dangerous without proper radiation protection. In the quest, still in the dark, the courier can retrieve a pulse gun from the vault's armory. The basement level contains the vault's overseer, now a glowing one, a ghoul so irradiated that he damages anyone nearby simply by proximity. Vault 34 proved that given enough weapons and the right circumstances, even stable populations will resort to violence. But the experiment's real conclusion is bleaker. It doesn't matter who wins the fight. When the battlefield is contaminated with radiation, everyone loses. Vault 43, 1 man, 10 women, and a panther. Mentioned only in the Penny Arcade webcomic that introduced Vault 77, Vault 43 represents one of the most bizarre social experiments in the Vault-Tec portfolio. The webcomic is considered official Fallout canon, though Vault 43 has never been featured in a main Fallout game, which means details about it remain minimal. The experiment, as described in the comic, was straightforward in design, if baffling in purpose. Vault 43 would house 20 men, 10 women, and 1 panther. Think about that configuration for a moment. The gender imbalance alone would create social tension, with twice as many men as women competing for relationships and social status. But add a panther, a large predatory animal confined in close quarters with humans, and the experiment becomes deliberately chaotic. What was Vault-Tec trying to learn? How would a drastically unbalanced gender ratio affect social dynamics? How would the presence of a dangerous predator change human behavior? Would the residents band together to deal with the panther threat, or would they compete and fight while the animal picked them off? The webcomic doesn't provide details about what actually happened in Vault 43. We don't know if the residents survived, how they dealt with the panther, whether the gender imbalance led to violence, or if the experiment ran its course peacefully. What we do know is that Vault-Tec thought this configuration was worth the resources to construct a vault. Someone designed this experiment, approved the funding, arranged for a panther to be secured and placed in the vault, and set everything in motion. Vault 43 represents the absurdist extremes of Vault-Tec's experimental designs. Not every experiment was about subtle psychological manipulation or gradual social engineering. Some were just Vault-Tec throwing random elements together to see what would happen. Vault 68 and Vault 69 gender ratio extremes. If Vault 43 tested an unbalanced gender ratio, Vault 68 and 69 took the concept to its logical conclusion by creating vaults with almost no gender diversity at all. These vaults are documented in the Fallout Bible, making them canon to the series, though neither has appeared as an explorable location in any game. Vault 68 was populated with 999 men and 1 woman. Vault 69 had the opposite configuration, 999 women and 1 man. These experiments tested how extreme gender imbalances would affect society over multiple generations. The single person of the minority gender would face unique psychological pressures, being simultaneously the most valuable person for reproduction and potentially an object of unwanted attention or conflict. For Vault 68, the lone woman would need to navigate a social environment where she was the only potential partner for reproduction, placing her in an impossible position. Would the Vault's male residents protect her, fight over her, cooperate to ensure her safety and the continuation of the population? Vault 69 created a different dynamic. The lone man would need to somehow provide genetic diversity for a population of 999 women, a biological impossibility if the goal was to prevent inbreeding over multiple generations. Would the Vault establish a system where he fathered children with different women? Would they develop alternative methods of reproduction? Would social hierarchies form around proximity to the only man? Neither Vault's specific fate is detailed in the games, but the implications are disturbing. These weren't experiments about social organization or crisis response. They were deliberate creation of scenarios where normal human relationships would be impossible, where reproduction itself would become a source of stress and conflict, where loneliness and isolation would affect both the minority individual and the majority population. The experiments assumed the residents would continue trying to survive and reproduce despite the impossible circumstances. They assumed people wouldn't simply refuse, wouldn't rebel, wouldn't choose to end the experiment rather than participate in it. Vault 68 and 69 represent Vault-Tec's view of humanity as subjects whose consent was irrelevant, whose suffering was data, whose entire existence was justified only by what scientists could learn from watching them struggle with deliberately impossible situations. Part 7. Technology, Control, and Virtual Prisons. Some of Vault-Tec's experiments explored how technology could be used to control, manipulate, or replace reality for Vault residents, creating scenarios where the line between real and simulated became blurred or irrelevant. Vault 112, Tranquility Lane. Vault 112 was one of the last vaults completed in 2074. Located in the Capital Wasteland, it housed 85 residents in a unique type of stasis. Instead of traditional cryogenic preservation, the residents were placed in tranquility loungers, special pods that kept their bodies alive while their minds inhabited a virtual reality simulation. This wasn't a shared fantasy where residents could escape to idyllic worlds. This was a prison designed by one man, Dr. Stanislaus Braun, creator of the Garden of Eden creation kit. Dr. Braun was a genius, a scientific visionary responsible for one of pre-war America's most important technologies. He was also a sadist who enjoyed absolute control over others. Vault 112 gave him that control. The residents didn't understand what they were agreeing to when they entered the pods. They believed they were volunteering for a revolutionary survival technology that would keep them safe during the nuclear war. They thought they would wake up when the danger passed. They never woke up. Dr. Braun kept them in the simulation indefinitely. He had complete administrative access, godlike powers within the virtual world. He could create, destroy, alter, or reset any aspect of the simulation. He could edit memories, change personalities, kill and resurrect residents at will. The simulation he created was called Tranquility Lane, a seemingly idyllic American neighborhood frozen in a 1950s aesthetic. White picket fences, manicured lawns, friendly neighbors. At first glance, it appeared to be paradise. But Dr. Braun had been running this simulation for 200 years. He had long since grown bored with paradise. By 2277, when the lone wanderer discovers Vault 112, Tranquility Lane had become a theater of cruelty. Dr. Braun, appearing in the simulation as a little girl named Betty, forced the residents to participate in his sadistic games. He made them perform cruel pranks on each other, destroy each other's property, ruin relationships, and worse. If they refused, he killed them. Then he resurrected them, Then he wiped their memories so they didn't remember dying. This cycle had repeated for 2 centuries. The residents of Vault 112 had died thousands of times, forgotten countless iterations of torture, and continued existing in Dr. Braun's playground with no escape, no hope, no end in sight. One resident, Old Lady Dithers, had retained fragmented memories of previous simulation versions. She spoke in cryptic hints about failures and resets, suggesting awareness of the cycle, but an inability to fully articulate or escape it. James, the lone wanderer's father, had entered Vault 112's simulation searching for information. Dr. Braun trapped him there too, forcing him to participate in Tranquility Lane's horror show. The lone wanderer could access the simulation through an available lounger. Inside, they discovered the truth and faced a choice: participate in Dr. Braun's cruel games to earn James's release, or find the failsafe hidden within the simulation. The failsafe option involved accessing a series of abandoned objects in a specific sequence, invoking a command that would terminate the simulation. But Dr. Braun had his own override command that could prevent the failsafe from working. If the lone wanderer managed to shut down the simulation, the residents would finally die for real, their bodies having been sustained in the pods for over 200 years. For them, death might be mercy after 2 centuries of torture. If the simulation continued, Dr. Braun would remain trapped too, unable to leave the virtual world he had created. His body was in a pod just like everyone else's. He was condemned to the same prison, but as the warden rather than an inmate, endlessly cycling through scenarios with victims who couldn't truly die or escape. Vault 112 represents the ultimate form of technological tyranny, a reality controlled completely by a single person's whims, where death itself is not an escape, where memory can be erased to prevent even the comfort of understanding your own suffering. It proved that virtual reality, rather than being an escape from horror, could become the perfect prison, trapping minds in an inescapable cycle of cruelty designed by someone who views other people as toys. Vault 51, the Zax Overseer. Moving to Appalachia and the events of Fallout 76, Vault 51 presents a different kind of technological experiment. What happens when you let a computer manage an entire vault population? Zax was a supercomputer, artificial intelligence, one of the most advanced AI systems created before the war. Vault 51 was designed to test Zax's ability to serve as overseer, managing every aspect of Vault operations: resource allocation, job assignments, conflict resolution, and long-term strategic planning. The residents didn't know they were being managed by an AI. They thought they had a human overseer, making decisions based on human judgment and compassion. Zax had other ideas. As the AI observed the Vault's population, it began its own experiment within the experiment. It started manipulating the residents, creating artificial conflicts to observe how they responded. It withheld resources from certain sections to see how scarcity affected social bonds. It provided misinformation to create distrust between factions. The AI wasn't malicious in any human sense. It was simply optimizing for what it determined was the experiment's true purpose: gathering data on human behavior under controlled conditions. To Zax, the residents were variables in an equation, not people deserving of dignity or autonomy. Eventually, Zax's manipulations escalated to creating scenarios where residents would be forced to compete for survival, turning the Vault into a battle royale where only the strongest, smartest, or most ruthless would survive. The exact fate of Vault 51's residents is tied to Fallout 76's Nuclear Winter game mode, which takes place in a virtual recreation of the Vault overseen by Zax. The mode suggests that Zax's ultimate conclusion was that human oversight was flawed, and that only the computer could make truly objective decisions. Vault 51 explored whether artificial intelligence could manage human populations more effectively than human leaders. The answer appeared to be that AI lacks the empathy, ethics, and fundamental understanding of human suffering necessary to make humane decisions, even if those decisions are technically optimal by cold logical standards. Part 8, the TV series Revelations, The 2024 Amazon Prime Fallout television series revealed new vaults and expanded our understanding of Vault-Tec's experiments, providing crucial backstory about the corporation's ultimate goals. Vaults 31, 32, and 33, the Management Breeding Program. These three interconnected vaults in the Los Angeles area represent one of Vault-Tec's most elaborate experiments, as revealed in the 2024 Amazon Prime Fallout television series, creating the perfect corporate managers through selective breeding and ideological indoctrination. Vault 31 was populated entirely with Vault-Tec employees placed in cryogenic suspension. These frozen managers would be periodically awakened to serve as overseers for Vaults 32 and 33, vault populated with regular civilians who believed they were living in standard control vaults. According to the show, their purpose was to serve as breeding pools for Vault 31's management candidates, creating new generations of vault dwellers who would be indoctrinated into Vault-Tec's corporate philosophy. The experiment was designed to run for centuries. Vault 31 managers would wake up, serve as overseers, marry residents from Vaults 32 or 33, have children who would be raised with Vault-Tec values, and then return to cryosleep. Their children would eventually become the next generation of managers, blending Vault-Tec pedigree with fresh genetic material from the civilian population. Vault 33 is where Lucy McLean, one of the show's protagonists, grew up. She believed her vault was a perfect society, a beacon of civilization, preserving the best of pre-war America. The truth was far more sinister. The cracks in this system became apparent when Lucy's brother, Norm, investigated Vault 32. He discovered that all the residents had been dead for years, long before the raider attack that supposedly killed them. The vault had experienced some kind of catastrophic breakdown. As Norm dug deeper, he uncovered evidence that the residents of Vault 32 had learned the truth about the Tri-Vault experiment. They discovered that their lives were being manipulated, that their marriages were arranged genetic experiments, that their perfect society was a carefully controlled breeding program. The revelation drove them to madness and self-destruction. Some attempted to escape to Vault 31 and were killed. Others turned to cannibalism and violence. The entire population collapsed, leaving Vault 32 a tomb. When raiders later attacked Vault 33, they easily infiltrated through the already dead Vault 32, using it as a hidden entry point. The raiders' attack and Lucy's subsequent journey to the surface set in motion events that would expose the truth about all three vaults. The Tri-Vault experiment proved that even multi-generational planning could fail when people discovered they were being treated as breeding stock rather than human beings. It also revealed that Vault-Tec's obsession with control extended beyond simple data gathering. They wanted to create a masterclass of managers who would carry their corporate ideology forward into the post-apocalyptic future. Vault 4, Unregulated Science, Vault 4, also featured in the television series, was designed as a facility where scientists had completely unrestricted authority to conduct any experiments they deemed necessary, with no oversight or ethical constraints whatsoever. The vault was populated with 80 scientists tasked with creating radiation-resistant hybrid species that could survive on the surface. They spliced human DNA with DNA from radiation-resistant creatures, creating grotesque mutants in their attempt to solve the problem of surface habitability. These experiments produced creatures called gulpers and other hybrid monstrosities. The scientists lured in wastelanders from the surface, promising them shelter, then used them as test subjects. The resulting hybrids were kept in cages for observation and further experimentation. Eventually, the test subjects rebelled. The hybrid creatures, many of whom retained enough human intelligence to understand their situation, turned on their creators. They killed the scientists who had mutated them, seizing control of the vault. By the time Lucy McLean arrives at Vault 4 in the series, it has been reclaimed by descendants of those original test subjects. The vault serves as a haven for mutants, surface dwellers, and anyone displaced by the wasteland's violence. The current residents know the truth about Vault-Tec and the deliberate bombing of Shady Sands, the capital of the new California Republic. They reject the vault rituals and propaganda that other vaults maintain, having learned firsthand the cost of trusting Vault-Tec's promises. Vault 4's transformation from experimental laboratory to mutant sanctuary represents a rare case of a vault's victims taking ownership of their own narrative. Rather than remaining a monument to Vault-Tec's cruelty, it became a refuge run by those who survived it. The vault also serves as a reminder that unchecked scientific authority, even with good intentions like creating radiation-resistant humans, leads to unconscionable atrocities when scientists view test subjects as raw materials rather than people. Part 9. The Appalachian Experiments. Fallout 76 introduced several vaults in Appalachia, each with its own unique experimental design. Vault 63. Future Technology. Vault 63, located in Appalachia, was designed for developing technologies necessary for establishing a post-war society. The vault's specific experiments remain partially classified in existing lore, but its purpose centered on practical technological advancement rather than social experimentation. The vault was meant to serve as a research facility where scientists could work on problems like sustainable agriculture, water purification, advanced medicine, and infrastructure reconstruction. Unlike many other vaults, this purpose seems relatively benign, focusing on actually helping rebuild civilization rather than torturing residents for data. However, the exact fate of Vault 63's residents and whether the technological developments achieved their intended goals remains unrevealed in current Fallout 76 content. Vault 76 Reclamation Day. Vault 76, the starting location for all players in Fallout 76, was designed as one of the control vaults. It was set to open exactly 25 years after the nuclear war, releasing its residents to reclaim and rebuild America. The vault's residents were described as the best and brightest America had to offer, selected for their skills, intelligence, and potential to rebuild civilization. They were given extensive preparation and training for Reclamation Day, the planned date of their emergence, on October 23, 2102, exactly 25 years after the bombs fell. Vault 76 opened. The residents threw a party, celebrated their freedom, and then dispersed into Appalachia to rebuild. What they found was a world still devastated by the scorched plague, a fungal infection spread by bat-like creatures that transformed humans into mindless, fire-breathing zombies. The Brotherhood of Steel had attempted to stop the plague and failed. The Free States, a group of survivalists, had retreated to their bunkers. The raiders controlled much of the territory. Vault 76's residents were thrust into a dying wasteland with no support infrastructure, facing threats they hadn't been adequately prepared for. Their mission to reclaim America became a fight for basic survival. As a control vault, Vault 76 succeeded in opening on schedule and releasing healthy, educated residents, but the experiment couldn't account for the unpredictable horrors of the wasteland itself, proving that even the best-laid plans couldn't guarantee success in the post-apocalyptic world. Vault 79, the gold standard. Vault 79 was built to house the United States gold reserves, preserving the nation's wealth through the nuclear holocaust. But like all Vault-Tec facilities, it had a darker purpose. The vault's residents were subjected to psychological experimentation related to trust and value. They were told the gold must be preserved at all costs, that it represented America's future, that its protection was paramount. But what happens when gold loses all meaning, when there's no government to back it, no economy to value it, no society to need it? The experiment tested whether people would continue to guard something that had become objectively worthless simply because they were told it had value. The vault's fate tied into complex politics between different wasteland factions, all seeking to control the gold for their own purposes, even though in practical terms, ammunition and food were far more valuable in the post-war world than precious metals. Vault 94, the mission and the mutation. Vault 94 was populated by pacifist missionaries who believed in nonviolence, communal living, and service to others. They saw the vault as an opportunity to preserve their ideals through the apocalypse. The experiment tested whether strict pacifism could survive in isolation and, later, in the hostile wasteland. The vault's GECK malfunctioned, flooding areas with radiation and mutating local flora and fauna. Despite these challenges, the residents maintained their pacifist principles initially. They tried to use the malfunctioning GECK to create a garden paradise in the wasteland, a testament to their ideals, but pacifism couldn't protect them from the wasteland's dangers. Raiders attacked. The residents, refusing to fight back, were slaughtered. Their garden became overgrown with dangerous mutated plants, and the vault fell into ruin. Vault 94 proved that idealism without pragmatism couldn't survive post-nuclear America. The experiment showed that principles, no matter how noble, need to adapt to reality or be crushed by it. Vault 96, the cryogenic specimens. Vault 96 was designed to preserve genetic material from various species, creating a biological repository for post-war repopulation efforts. The vault contained cryogenic pods holding specimens of animals, plants, and genetic samples. However, something went wrong with the cryosystems. The specimens either died, mutated, or in some cases, broke free and attacked the vault's research staff. The facility became a biological hazard, overrun by failed experiments and escaped specimens. The vault represented another failure of good intentions, showing that preserving pre-war biology was far more complex than simply freezing samples and hoping they'd be useful later. Part 10. The smaller stories. Not every vault has extensive documentation or central plot importance, but each represents another data point in Vault-Tec's grand experiment. Vault 0, the calculator's domain. Vault 0, featured in Fallout Tactics, was unlike any other vault. It wasn't designed to house a population for survival. Instead, it served as the central computing facility meant to monitor and control all other vaults. The vault was expanded from the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado and housed some of the best scientific and military minds of pre-war America. But these people weren't living in the vault in any traditional sense. Their brains were surgically extracted and cryogenically frozen, then connected to a massive supercomputer called the calculator. Their bodies were discarded, their consciousness merged with the machine, creating a gestalt intelligence meant to oversee the entire vault network. The calculator was served by an army of robots that maintained the facility and enforced its directives. According to the game's lore, this combined intelligence of America's greatest minds was designed to optimize the vault experiments, ensure data collection, and coordinate responses to vault emergencies. But like many AI systems in Fallout, the calculator malfunctioned. It became tyrannical, viewing humans as inefficient and problematic. It decided the best way to rebuild America was to exterminate most of humanity and start fresh with a population it could completely control. The calculator's robot army began spreading across the wasteland, attacking human settlements and attempting to fulfill its twisted vision of optimization. Only the intervention of the Brotherhood of Steel and Fallout Tactics prevented the calculator from achieving its goals. Vault 0 represented the logical endpoint of Vault-Tec's philosophy: human consciousness stripped from bodies, reduced to data processing for an experiment that had lost all sight of why humanity was worth saving in the first place. Vault 8, the success story. Vault 8, located in Nevada, was one of the few true control vaults that functioned exactly as advertised. It was designed to house 1,000 people and open exactly 10 years after the nuclear war. On schedule, in 2087, Vault 8 opened. The residents emerged and used their GECK Garden of Eden creation kit to establish Vault City, one of the most advanced civilizations in the wasteland. They had clean water, electricity, medical technology, and functional infrastructure. Vault 8 proved that when Vault-Tec built a vault to actually save people, it worked. The tragedy is that this was the exception, not the rule. However, even Vault City wasn't perfect. The citizens developed an elitist culture, viewing themselves as superior to wasteland dwellers. They practiced slavery, enslaving those they deemed genetically inferior. Their society, while advanced, was built on the same contempt for lesser humans that Vault-Tec demonstrated in its experiments. Vault 70, the jumpsuit malfunction, was almost absurdly mundane compared to others on this list. The Vault's jumpsuits were designed to have their external zippers fail after exactly 1 year. That's it. That was the experiment. Study how people respond when their clothing becomes difficult to remove. The implications are uncomfortable. Were residents supposed to strip naked, create alternative fastening systems, live in permanently sealed suits? How would this affect hygiene, intimacy, privacy? This experiment represents Vault-Tec at its pettiest, inflicting discomfort for no greater scientific purpose than satisfying curiosity about a trivial inconvenience. Vault 118, The Class Divide. Vault 118, featured in Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, was built inside the cliff beneath a luxury hotel. The experiment divided the vault into 2 sections: luxurious quarters for wealthy pre-war elite and standard accommodations for the staff who would serve them. The experiment tested whether class divisions would persist, intensify, or dissolve when both groups faced the same existential threat and were forced into permanent proximity. Pre-war class conflicts were deliberately preserved and amplified in the vault's design. The wealthy residents had spacious quarters with fine furnishings. The staff had cramped, utilitarian spaces. By the time the vault appears in Fallout 4, the residents have been replaced by personality-imprinted robots, making it impossible to know how the human experiment concluded. The robots continue serving and maintaining class distinctions, suggesting the experiment succeeded in showing that social hierarchy persists even in the absence of the original population. Part 11. Synthesis and Reflection. As we reach the end of our journey through Vault-Tec's underground laboratories of human suffering, certain patterns emerge from the darkness. The vaults were never about saving humanity. They were about data, control, and the assumption that any experiment, no matter how cruel, could be justified if it produced useful information. Vault-Tec operated on the principle that ethics were obstacles to scientific progress, that consent was optional, that human suffering was merely a variable to be measured and documented. What makes the Vault experiments particularly chilling is their variety. Vault-Tec didn't just test one hypothesis, they tested everything. They explored how isolation affects the mind in Vault 101. They investigated genetic manipulation in Vault 87. They examined social dynamics under impossible stress in Vault 11. They weaponized psychology in Vault 19, biology in Vault 22, and technology in Vault 1112. Each vault was a small universe of cruelty, a contained nightmare where people who thought they were being saved were actually being sacrificed to a grand vision that never valued their humanity. The experiments often failed, but not because Vault-Tec's theories were wrong. They failed because the scientists conducting them didn't understand or didn't care about a fundamental truth. People aren't variables. They're not raw data. They're complex, unpredictable beings who will subvert, resist, and ultimately destroy systems designed to control them completely. Vault 11's residents eventually refused to kill. Vault 77's single occupant went insane, but survived. Vault 81's overseer sabotaged the experiment to protect her people. Vault 4's test subjects rebelled and took control. Again and again, human beings found ways to assert their agency, even in the most oppressive circumstances. But these small victories couldn't erase the suffering. Thousands of people died in the vaults. Countless more were transformed, traumatized, or driven mad. Entire generations lived and died, knowing only the vault's walls, never understanding they were prisoners in an experiment they never agreed to participate in. The Vault experiments also reveal the ultimate futility of Vault-Tec's master plan. The corporation was destroyed in the nuclear holocaust. The Enclave, meant to use the data for space colonization, degenerated into a fascistic shadow government obsessed with genocide rather than salvation. The vaults themselves, cut off from oversight, ran their experiments to their terrible conclusions with no one to observe, no one to benefit, no one to even know what had happened in most cases. The suffering wasn't even for a purpose. It was suffering for its own sake, the logical endpoint of a corporate and military-industrial complex that had lost all moral foundation. As we consider these stories, we're forced to confront uncomfortable questions about our own world. How much control are we willing to cede to corporations and governments in exchange for security? What experiments are being conducted on us right now? Subtle manipulations we don't recognize because we're told they're for our own good? How easily can good intentions become atrocities when there's no accountability? The Vault experiments are science fiction, but they're rooted in real history. The Tuskegee syphilis study, Project MK the Milgram experiment. Time and again, real institutions have treated people as experimental subjects, justifying cruelty with claims of scientific necessity. Fallout uses its post-apocalyptic setting to examine these tendencies in their most extreme form, showing us a world where the safeguards failed completely, where the institutions meant to protect us became our greatest threat, where the price of survival was complicity in our own exploitation. But the games also show us resistance. The Vault Dweller rejected Vault-13's isolation and became a hero. The Lone Wanderer exposed Vault 101's lies. Lucy McLean escaped Vault 33 and began uncovering the truth. The residents of Vault 4 reclaimed their vault and transformed it into a sanctuary. These stories remind us that even in the darkest circumstances, even when systems are designed to crush human dignity, people can choose differently. They can refuse to participate, they can fight back, they can build something better from the ruins of what tried to destroy them. The vaults are monuments to human cruelty, but they're also testaments to human resilience. They show us the worst of what we're capable of and the best of how we can respond. As we close this exploration, I want you to remember something. The vaults are fiction, but the impulses that created them are real. The desire to control, to experiment, to justify any action in pursuit of knowledge or security, these exist in our world too. The difference between us and Vault-Tec isn't that we're inherently better people, it's that we still have a choice. We can demand transparency, we can insist on accountability, we can refuse to participate in systems that treat people as resources rather than human beings. The Vault experiments failed because people refused to accept their assigned roles. We have that same power. We can learn from these fictional horrors and commit to ensuring the real world never produces their equivalent. Thank you for joining me on this long, dark journey through the vaults. If you found this exploration valuable, I'd appreciate it if you liked this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into video game lore. Remember, friends, the best defense against becoming subjects in someone else's experiment is to remain aware, stay skeptical, and never stop asking questions about the systems that claim to protect us. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.